At 8:41 a.m., Laura Bennett crossed the same corner she crossed every weekday, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, her scarf tucked against the cold. Two cameras caught her from different angles, one outside the bakery, one above the pharmacy sign. On both screens she looked ordinary. Focused. On time. Alive. And then, in a gap no longer than a short walk, less than a minute, Laura vanished. Laura was 38 and built her life like a quiet promise. She lived 10 minutes from her parents, close enough to show up with soup when her father's back acted up, close enough to be the one who remembered birthdays and prescription refills. At work, she was the person people trusted with deadlines and delicate clients. She had a gentle way of listening that made strangers talk more than they meant to. At home, her rescue dog, Milo, was her shadow. He knew the rhythm of her days, the keys placed in the bowl, the leash hung on the hook, the evening walk that always ended at the same small park. Laura didn't disappear from routines. Routines were how she stayed steady after years of choices that hadn't been kind to her. Her last relationship had ended badly, too much intensity, too many apologies that became patterns. But lately, her friends noticed a change. She had started saying no without explaining herself. She had stopped accepting uncertainty as romance. She talked about saving for a brighter apartment, about taking a weekend class for professional certification, about normal as if it were a goal worth protecting. The morning she vanished began like any other. Laura texted her mother a photo of Milo's face pressed against the window, captioned, "He's judging my outfit." She sent her father a reminder about his appointment. She forwarded a work message to her supervisor with a quick, efficient note, nothing emotional, nothing out of place. She bought a breakfast roll and a small yogurt, paid with her card, and left the shop at 8:37. Police would later reconstruct the route down to the meter. The cameras showed her moving along the main road toward Greystone House, the office building where she worked on the 4th floor. She was seen passing a newsstand, turning slightly to avoid a stroller, pausing for half a second at a crosswalk as a delivery van rolled by. The final clear image, 8:41, captured her stepping onto East Alder Street, the last short stretch before the entrance. That was where the camera coverage thinned, an awkward blind angle between two buildings, a service lane used mostly for deliveries, a stretch where people walked without thinking because it was so close to the front doors. When Laura didn't badge into the building by 9 o'clock, her supervisor assumed a transit delay. By 9:20, it felt strange. Laura was never late without a message. By 9:45, her mother called her twice and got no answer. At 10:10, her father drove past her apartment, just to check, expecting to find her sick in bed. Instead, Milo was inside, anxious and pacing, his water bowl full, his food untouched. Laura's work bag wasn't on the counter. Her coat wasn't on the chair. The apartment looked normal, too normal. No suitcase. No frantic packing. No note. Her mother stood in the doorway, staring at the silence of the rooms, and said something the responding officer would write down word for word. She wouldn't do this. Not without Milo. That afternoon, investigators began with the basics: banks, transit cards, phone location. Nothing moved. No withdrawals. No travel bookings. No activity that suggested a decision. Only one thing stood out early: the messages on her phone, stacked like pressure. Most were from a single name in her contacts, Daniel Price, a colleague. And the night before Laura vanished, Daniel had sent his last one at 11:58 p.m. After that, he went quiet. Completely. It was the kind of silence that didn't feel like peace. It felt like a switch had been flipped. By evening, Laura Bennett's family had stopped using the word missing. Missing suggested confusion, someone lost, wandering, unable to find the way back. Laura wasn't lost. Laura was precise. She never went anywhere without planning, never left Milo without arranging care, never turned off her phone during the day. Her mother sat at the kitchen table with Laura's phone bill open on the screen, scrolling through the same entries again and again as if repetition could force logic into place. Detective Hannah Cole arrived at the apartment just before 7 p.m. She didn't come with drama. No loud commands, no sharp judgments. She walked slowly through the rooms, looking for what didn't belong. There were no signs of a struggle. No broken glass. No overturned furniture. Laura's passport remained in the drawer with its protective sleeve. Her emergency medication, kept in a clearly marked box beside the bed, was still there. Even her winter boots were lined up neatly by the door. "Do you know anyone who would want to hurt her?" the detective asked. Laura's father answered first. No. But Laura's mother didn't speak immediately. She held Milo's leash in her lap like a lifeline and stared at the dog's ears twitching at every sound. Then she said quietly, "There is someone who wouldn't accept being told no." That name came out of her mouth like it tasted bitter. Daniel Price. At Greystone House, Daniel worked in a different department but in the same orbit, shared meetings, shared deadlines, shared office gossip. He had been married for years. He also had a reputation, charismatic, helpful, always, just checking in. 2 years earlier, Laura had briefly been pulled into something with him, something that began with late-night conversations about stress and loneliness and how no one understands. It had ended in tears, anger, and humiliation when Laura found out he wasn't simply unhappy in his marriage, he was addicted to the attention, the secrecy, the power of someone waiting for him. Laura had backed away hard. She changed lunch routines. She avoided being alone in meeting rooms. She told colleagues, politely but firmly, that she didn't want Daniel passing along messages for her. And in the months before her disappearance, she had been planning a transfer to another division. Detective Cole requested Laura's phone and had tech support pull the message history. What appeared on the screen wasn't a conversation. It was a flood. At first, Daniel's messages were normal. "Are you okay? Can we talk? I just want closure." Then they turned sharper. "You can't ignore me. I know you're reading these. I did everything for you." And finally, they became emotionally volatile, flipping between guilt and affection as if he could wear Laura down through sheer volume. "Please answer. I can't sleep. I miss you. Don't do this to me. You're being cruel. I'm not the bad guy here." In the last 2 weeks alone, Daniel had sent over 1,000 messages. Some nights, he sent 30 or 40 in a row without a response. And then, after 11:58 p.m., the night before Laura vanished, nothing. A full stop. Detective Cole knew what that could mean. People who were panicking didn't suddenly become calm. People who were obsessed didn't suddenly become disciplined. Unless they believed the problem was solved. The next morning, Greystone House became the center of the investigation. The building manager provided security footage from every camera they had: lobby, entrances, elevators, parking garage. Officers watched hour after hour, tracking Laura from the bakery to the corner. She never entered the lobby. She never badged in. She never appeared on the elevator footage. She simply reached the edge of the blind zone and disappeared. Detective Cole walked the route herself. The blind spot was small, but it was real, a service lane between 2 buildings with a utility door, dumpsters, and a delivery entrance rarely used during morning hours. A person could step into that lane for a moment without being captured on any camera. Too close to the office to feel dangerous. Too quiet to draw attention. Witness canvassing began immediately. A woman working at the pharmacy reported hearing a car door slam around the time Laura would have passed. A courier remembered seeing a dark sedan paused in an odd spot, engine running. A cleaner from the adjacent building mentioned a man looking around like he was waiting for someone. None of them could identify the face clearly. But one detail returned again and again: the man seemed anxious, restless hands, quick movements, the posture of someone who wanted to control the timing of an encounter. Detective Cole requested Daniel Price's phone records. When the response arrived, the pattern was unmistakable. Calls to Laura that lasted seconds, hanging up, calling again. Messages every few minutes. There were also gaps, odd gaps, where his phone went silent during times he claimed he was at home with his wife. Then came the most alarming detail. On the morning Laura disappeared, Daniel's phone connected to a tower within a few hundred meters of East Alder Street. At 8:38. Right when Laura was approaching the blind zone. Detective Cole didn't arrest him. Not yet. Not without more. But she moved quickly. She requested Daniel be brought in for questioning. He arrived late that afternoon, wearing a crisp shirt and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm shocked," he said immediately. "Laura? Disappeared? She's responsible. She wouldn't." His voice broke at the right moment. His hands clasped tightly. His performance was practiced. Detective Cole watched him talk about Laura like she belonged to him. He described her as fragile. Confused. Going through a lot. He implied she might have run away. That she might have had a breakdown. Then Detective Cole asked a simple question. "When was the last time you spoke to her?" Daniel blinked once, slowly. "I don't remember," he said. "I haven't bothered her. I've given her space." Cole didn't react. She only slid a printout across the table, message timestamps, volume, frequency. Daniel's throat tightened. His eyes flicked down. For half a second, he wasn't acting anymore. Then he leaned back and exhaled sharply. "Okay. Yes. I messaged her. But it's not what it looks like. She led me on." "You sent her 73 messages on Tuesday," Cole said. 54 on Wednesday. 32 yesterday." Daniel stared at the wall, jaw working. Then Cole noticed something else. His forearms. There were faint scratches on the inside of his left arm, thin lines, half-healed. And above them, the skin had a subtle discoloration, as if something had been rubbed in. Makeup. Someone had tried to cover the marks. Cole didn't accuse him out loud. She simply documented it. Photographed it. Noted it as evidence. Daniel followed her gaze and pulled his sleeves down quickly. "I have a cat," he snapped. "It scratches." But his voice was too sharp for such a small explanation. When Daniel left the interview room, Detective Cole didn't feel relief. She felt certainty tightening into something colder. Because the next piece of information arrived before midnight. Daniel had shown up to work that morning, late, sweaty, and visibly unsettled. And several co-workers reported the same strange detail. When someone asked him if he was okay, he answered too fast, too loud. "Of course. Why wouldn't I be?" As if he was afraid the truth might spill out if he didn't speak first. And somewhere in the blind zone near East Alder Street, only meters from Greystone House, something had happened that Daniel Price couldn't talk his way out of. Not forever. Detective Hannah Cole didn't sleep much after the interview. In her experience, people didn't cover scratches with makeup unless they had a reason to hide where the scratches came from. And they didn't suddenly stop sending obsessive messages unless something had changed, something final. But instinct wasn't evidence. Evidence was what held in court. So she built the case the way she always did, piece by piece, until the weight of it could no longer be ignored. The next morning, investigators pulled Daniel Price's movements from every source available: workplace logs, parking entries, phone location data, and the building's internal cameras. At first glance, his workday looked normal, almost too normal. He appeared in the hallway at 9:22, greeted a colleague, carried a folder, went into a meeting. But then they rewound. Daniel didn't enter the building through the main doors, which were covered by 2 cameras. He used the side entrance, the delivery corridor, where footage was grainier and angles were poor. The exact corridor that connected to the blind zone behind the building. And his entry time, 9:21, was late for him. Daniel was known for arriving early, drinking espresso at the lobby cafe, loudly discussing schedules. This time, he avoided the lobby. Avoided cameras. Avoided witnesses. Detective Cole ordered a full reconstruction of the timeline. Laura's last confirmed camera sighting, 8:41. Her phone's last recorded movement, 8:42, a brief connection as if the device had been moved, not used. Daniel's phone near the same area, 8:38 to 8:44. Daniel arriving at work through the side corridor, 9:21. That left a window of about 40 minutes. 40 minutes with no camera footage. 40 minutes where a person could be intercepted, forced into an unseen space, and never return. Cole requested a forensic check of the blind zone itself. Officers searched the service lane, dumpsters, utility doors, drainage channels. They found nothing obvious, no dropped phone, no torn scarf, no blood. But criminals didn't always leave visible traces. Not if they had time. Not if they had access to cleaning supplies, gloves, and controlled spaces. Daniel Price worked in a building full of supply closets. Full of locked rooms. Full of keys. The team interviewed employees who had access to the service lane. Most shrugged, deliveries came and went, people smoked back there, sometimes maintenance staff used it for equipment. No one paid attention. But then a junior admin assistant hesitated and said, "He was back there, that morning." "Who?" Cole asked. The assistant swallowed. "Daniel." She described him standing in the service lane, staring down the street like he was waiting. When Laura asked her a month earlier whether Daniel had been following her, the assistant had laughed it off, because it sounded dramatic, because it was easier to pretend it wasn't serious. Now her face drained. "I should have said something sooner." The next step was Daniel's vehicle. He drove a dark sedan, kept spotless, talked about it like it was an extension of his image. Cole obtained a warrant for a forensic examination. Daniel's car was clean. Too clean. The interior smelled faintly of harsh chemicals, like recent scrubbing. The trunk carpeting had been shampooed recently, fibers still stiff in places. A technician removed the trunk liner and found moisture trapped beneath it, fresh. It wasn't a smoking gun. But it was a direction. Then came the dogs. Search dogs trained to detect trace scents were walked around Daniel's parking space at Greystone House. They alerted strongly near the driver's door and trunk seam. Then they alerted again at the rear passenger seat. Detective Cole didn't celebrate. Dogs didn't speak in words. Alerts could be challenged. But Cole had something now, a reason to dig harder, a reason to stop treating Daniel like a person of interest and start treating him like the center of the storm. When Daniel was brought in again, his demeanor had shifted. The first interview had been performance. This one was defensive. He arrived with a lawyer. His lawyer did most of the talking. "We understand the department wants to ask questions," the lawyer said smoothly. "But there is no proof my client had anything to do with Laura Bennett's disappearance." Cole slid another set of papers across the table. Phone location data. Tower pings. A map with highlighted overlap. "We're not asking about Laura's disappearance," Cole said calmly. "We're asking why your phone was within meters of the last location she was ever seen, at the exact time she vanished." Daniel's cheeks flushed. His eyes darted toward his lawyer. The lawyer frowned. "My client may have been in the area for unrelated reasons." Cole leaned forward slightly. "Then he should be able to tell us exactly what those reasons were." "Because Laura didn't walk into her office building. She vanished outside it." And you were there. Daniel cleared his throat. I drive by there sometimes. I take different routes. I'm not tracking her. Cole waited. Daniel snapped, it's a public street. He wasn't wrong. But he wasn't convincing. And then, when Cole asked about the scratches again, Daniel's control broke. It's my cat, he said loudly, too loudly. Why are you obsessed with scratches? People get scratches. The lawyer put a hand up. That's enough. My client is done for today. Cole watched them leave. She'd gotten little, on purpose. Daniel had revealed something far more valuable than answers, fear. The kind that makes people rush, overcorrect, and make mistakes. 2 days later, Daniel made his first big mistake. He reported a break-in. It happened overnight, he said. Someone entered his house while he slept. They stole 2 items, his laptop and his phone. Nothing else. Not jewelry. Not cash. Not his wife's devices. Just the electronics that could contain his messages, location history, and data trails. Detective Cole stared at the report. She didn't need to voice her thoughts. Everyone in the room understood. If it was staged, it wasn't subtle. It was desperation. Officers visited Daniel's home. The entry point was a back window with a clean cut. No messy damage, no frantic search patterns inside. Whoever did it had known what they wanted and where it was. Daniel's wife, Melissa Price, stood stiffly in the living room, arms crossed. Her face was pale with fury and disbelief. "This is insane," she said quietly. "I didn't know he was still, like that." Cole asked her carefully, "Did you know he was contacting Laura?" Melissa's jaw tightened. "Not like this." She admitted Daniel had become agitated in the days leading up to Laura's disappearance, restless, snappish, constantly checking his phone. The morning Laura vanished, Daniel left the house in a rush, without breakfast, without his usual routine. "And when he came home?" Cole asked. Melissa hesitated. Her eyes flicked toward the hallway as if Daniel might be listening. "He showered immediately," she said. "The second he walked in." "Was that normal?" "No." Melissa's voice cracked. "And he threw his clothes straight into the wash." Detective Cole noted every word. Then came mistake number 2. Daniel abruptly announced a solo work trip. Not through the company. Not with colleagues. Not with standard scheduling. He emailed his supervisor late at night, "Need to be away for several days. Important client visit. Will update." His supervisor, who disliked conflict and disliked paperwork, approved it. Daniel left at dawn, driving alone. And for hours, his phone traveled into a remote region, long stretches of highway, off-road detours, and lingering stops in isolated areas with no clear business purpose. Detective Cole had his location monitored in real time. She dispatched surveillance units. They followed at a distance as Daniel stopped at a small gas station, bought coffee, then drove into a narrow road lined with trees. His car disappeared behind bends, reappeared, disappeared again. At one point, he stopped for nearly 40 minutes near an access path leading into dense woodland. No one saw him carry anything large. But no one could see everything. It was winter. Cold. Ground damp. Perfect conditions for concealment. Cole requested immediate warrants for searches tied to his travel pattern. She didn't want to wait. If Daniel was disposing of Laura's remains, time was her enemy. By the time police searched that wooded area, Daniel was already back on the highway, returning toward the city as if nothing unusual had happened. But the dogs didn't lie with their bodies. Search dogs alerted strongly along the edge of the access path and near a shallow ditch by the trees. Officers dug. They found disturbed soil, recent, uneven. They found signs of cleaning supplies discarded in a bag, gloves, wipes, chemical containers. And near the spot where Daniel's vehicle had been parked, they found something small and devastating. A torn strip of fabric, caught under branches. It was pale blue. Laura's mother identified it immediately. "That's her scarf," she whispered. "I bought it for her." Still, no body was found. No grave. No clear remains. Only traces, like a story ripped apart and scattered. When Daniel returned home, officers were waiting. He stepped out of his car and froze at the sight of uniforms. For a second, his face went blank, pure calculation. Then he tried to smile. "Detective," he said, voice tight, "this is getting out of control." Detective Cole answered evenly, "No, Daniel. It's getting clear." And as Daniel was escorted away, Milo, Laura's dog, howled from her parents' house across town, as if some part of him understood something the world still refused to say out loud. Laura wasn't lost. Laura had been taken. And now the case was no longer about a disappearance. It was about proving what had happened in that 40-minute gap, without the one thing everyone wanted most. A place to bring her home. Daniel Price was arrested on a cold Tuesday morning, but the city didn't feel any warmer afterward. For Laura Bennett's parents, the arrest wasn't relief. It was confirmation of what they had already known in their bones since the first hours: Laura hadn't simply gone missing. Something had happened to her, something violent, deliberate, and irreversible. The problem was that the world still demanded proof. And proof, in cases without a recovered body, had to be built like a bridge over emptiness. Detective Hannah Cole understood what the next phase would look like. Daniel would deny everything. His defense would lean hard on one fact: no remains. No final location, no direct forensic confirmation, no moment caught clearly on camera. So the investigation widened again, past Greystone House, past the service lane, past the remote road where the dogs had alerted. Cole ordered a complete seizure and analysis of Daniel's digital life. It was slow work. Frustrating. Expensive. But it revealed what Daniel thought he could hide. Even though he reported his phone and laptop stolen, the department obtained cloud backups, account activity logs, and old device histories. They recovered fragments, deleted messages, location points, app data. What emerged wasn't one single explosive discovery. It was a pattern. A tightening net. Daniel wasn't simply a man who had made mistakes in a relationship. He was a man who needed control, and when control failed, he escalated. Investigators pulled his workplace records for the months before Laura vanished: badge entries, building access requests, security door logs. They found that Daniel had accessed areas of Greystone House he had no professional reason to enter, especially service corridors and storage sections. Sometimes late in the day. Sometimes early. He had also requested access to a restricted maintenance hallway under the excuse of supporting facilities coordination. He wasn't facilities. He was positioning. Then came the witnesses. One coworker remembered something from the week before Laura's disappearance. Daniel had been standing near the window, watching Laura cross the street. "He looked angry," she said quietly. But not loud angry. Like, locked-in angry. Another colleague remembered Daniel complaining repeatedly that Laura was trying to humiliate him. That she owed him a conversation. That she couldn't just walk away. A receptionist recalled Daniel arriving the morning Laura disappeared, breathing hard, sweat darkening the collar of his shirt even though it wasn't warm. He asked if anyone had seen her, she said. But it didn't feel like concern. It felt like he was checking a box. Daniel's wife, Melissa, was the most important witness, and the hardest. For days after the arrest, she refused to speak. She hired her own lawyer. She protected herself with cold silence, as if distance could rewrite the past years. But the pressure didn't come from police. It came from reality. Melissa began to remember details she had ignored. Things that seemed small at the time but now glowed with meaning. Like Daniel's sudden insistence on using heavy cleaning products in the garage. Like the way he had been washing the car's interior himself, late at night. Like the bag of trash he took out alone at 2 a.m. Because he couldn't sleep. Melissa finally agreed to speak with Detective Cole under her lawyer's supervision. Her hands shook as she held a tissue. "I didn't think he was capable of this," she said. "I thought he was just dramatic. Self-centered. I thought he'd move on." Cole didn't answer with comfort. Comfort wasn't the point. The point was truth. Melissa swallowed and said, "The morning Laura disappeared. Daniel came home for lunch." Cole's eyes narrowed. "He told us he didn't." "I know," Melissa whispered. "But he did." She described Daniel arriving home unexpectedly at 12:13 p.m., straight into the shower, refusing to speak, face pale, eyes too bright. He ate nothing. Drank water like he'd run miles. And then, Melissa said, voice cracking, he stood in front of the mirror and covered scratches. "What scratches?" Cole asked gently. "On his arms. And one on his neck." Melissa pressed the tissue to her mouth. "I saw him do it. Makeup. He used my concealer." Cole sat perfectly still. It mattered because it wasn't theory anymore. It wasn't the detective's suspicion. It was a witness statement from the person who lived with him. Melissa continued, "He told me it was nothing. That he'd bumped into something at work. But, he was shaking." "Did he say Laura's name?" Cole asked. Melissa's eyes filled. She nodded once. "He said, 'She did this to me.'" The courtroom could build a case on that. The prosecution also built a timeline based on movement, not confession. They mapped Daniel's car routes using traffic cameras on major roads, fuel purchase records, and toll data. It showed him making an unusual loop on the morning Laura vanished, approaching Greystone House from the opposite direction of his typical commute. Then, the day after Laura disappeared, he drove toward an industrial cleaning supply store and made a purchase: heavy-duty disinfectant, odor neutralizer, gloves, plastic sheeting. He paid in cash. He didn't usually pay cash. And in the following days, his car entered a car wash 3 times, twice in the same afternoon. Every small act became a strand. The defense tried to tear them apart. "No body," they repeated. "No murder weapon. No confession." They implied Laura could have walked away on her own. They hinted at mental health. They spoke of starting over. They referenced Laura's past heartbreak, trying to paint her as unstable enough to disappear voluntarily. But Laura's life argued back without words. Her bank account stayed untouched. Her documents stayed home. Her medication stayed behind. Her dog stayed without care. You didn't start over by leaving your entire identity in a drawer. And then came the break-in report. The prosecutor displayed the police report on a screen and asked the jury to focus on the stolen items. 2 things were taken, the prosecutor said. The defendant's laptop and phone. Nothing else. Not valuables. Not cash. Not the spouse's electronics. The very items that would contain evidence of his obsession and movements. The jury sat still. They were being asked to see what common sense could see, that it wasn't a random burglary. It was cleanup. And one more moment mattered, a moment the defense couldn't soften with alternate explanations. 3 days after Laura disappeared, Daniel Price had made an abrupt solo work trip into a remote wooded area. He had stopped for extended periods without explanation. Dogs later alerted around his vehicle and that location. Officers found disturbed soil and discarded cleaning items. It didn't prove a body was there. But it proved intent. It proved Daniel had driven into isolation with purpose. Which led to the charge beyond murder, attempting to obstruct justice. When the case finally reached trial, Greystone House employees filled the benches. Laura's parents sat in the front row, hands linked so tightly their knuckles whitened. A framed photo of Laura rested against Laura's mother's handbag, a soft smile, warm eyes, the kind of face that made strangers feel safe. Daniel sat at the defense table in a tailored suit, jaw clenched, expression controlled. He never looked at Laura's family. When Detective Cole took the stand, she didn't dramatize. She didn't raise her voice. She spoke as if she were building a wall, brick by brick, calm and solid. Laura's last camera sighting and sudden disappearance in a narrow blind zone. Daniel's phone in the same area at the critical time. Daniel's sudden silence after obsessive messaging. Scratches hidden with makeup. Unusual arrival to work through a side corridor. Signs of aggressive cleaning in the vehicle. Staged burglary, removing devices. Remote travel pattern consistent with concealment efforts. Dogs alerting strongly to his car and the remote area. Witness statements showing obsession, jealousy, and escalation. The defense cross-examined hard. "Detective," the lawyer said sharply, "isn't it true you cannot say with certainty that Laura Bennett is dead?" Cole paused. The courtroom held its breath. Then Cole said evenly, "Laura Bennett vanished within minutes of reaching her workplace. She has not accessed money. She has not contacted family. She left behind medication and her pet. She has left no trace of planning. In my professional opinion, Laura Bennett did not choose to disappear. Something happened to her in that blind zone. And the defendant is the only person we can place there, with motive, obsession, and subsequent concealment behavior. It wasn't emotion. It was certainty backed by facts." The jury listened. And Laura's mother stared at Daniel the entire time, her face set in a grief so disciplined it looked like stone. Because for her, the trial wasn't about proving Daniel guilty. It was about demanding the world admit what it was trying to avoid. Laura didn't leave. Someone made sure she couldn't come back. And the truth was finally close enough to touch, except for the one thing that still wasn't there. Laura herself. Trials weren't built on certainty. They were built on narrative, on whether 12 people could look at a pile of facts and agree it told only one story. And Daniel Price's defense worked hard to offer a different one. They brought in experts who spoke calmly about the difficulty of no remains cases. They pointed to the gaps in camera coverage and suggested someone else could have been waiting in that blind zone. They argued that Daniel's obsessive messaging wasn't proof of violence, only proof of immaturity, poor boundaries, an unhappy man acting out. They repeated the same phrase until it sounded like a prayer. No body. No murder. But the prosecution didn't need a body to prove a life was stolen. They needed to show absence plus behavior plus intention, and that was where Daniel began to sink. Because Daniel wasn't just a suspect with a motive. Daniel was a suspect who couldn't control himself. Even in court. On the 7th day of trial, Laura's best friend, Megan Shaw, took the stand. Megan had known Laura for over a decade. She described Laura's routine in detail, the predictable mornings, the daily texts to her parents, the way she planned Milo's care even for a single overnight trip. She didn't vanish, Megan said. Someone erased her. The defense tried to weaken her testimony with questions about Laura's emotional past. Wasn't Laura sometimes overwhelmed, the lawyer pressed. Didn't she talk about wanting to start over? Megan leaned forward, eyes hard. Starting over is not the same as disappearing without money, without medication, without her dog. Then she said something that shifted the room. Laura told me Daniel scared her. Daniel's head snapped up. Megan continued, steady. She said he'd show up where she was. He'd watch her. He'd corner her in the hallway and act like it was coincidence. She started changing her route to work because she thought he was following her. The defense objected. The judge allowed limited testimony. But the jury had already heard it. Daniel's hands clenched on the table. His mouth tightened like he was biting back something angry. And then his control slipped further. The prosecution introduced a printout of Daniel's message history, carefully selected lines, not sensational, but revealing. Messages that weren't romantic. Messages that were possession. If you don't answer, I'll come to you. You can't treat me like this. You belong to me more than you admit. Don't make me the enemy. The prosecutor didn't read them like drama. He read them like evidence. Daniel's wife, Melissa, sat in the back row, face pale. She hadn't looked at Daniel since the arrest. She kept her eyes fixed on the wall, as if the courtroom air itself were too sharp. When the prosecutor called Melissa to the stand, the room changed again. People expected tears, a trembling woman defending her husband out of habit or fear. Instead, Melissa's voice was quiet and flat. I'm here, she said, because I need the truth to matter more than loyalty. The defense tried to limit her testimony, but the judge allowed it. Melissa's observations were relevant, especially regarding the scratches and Daniel's behavior. Melissa described the morning Laura vanished. He was late, she said. He left without his usual things. He was agitated. Then she described the lunch return. He came home unexpectedly. He showered immediately. He wouldn't let me touch his clothes. He washed them himself. The prosecutor asked gently, "Did you see injuries on him?" Melissa swallowed. "Yes." "What kind?" "Scratches," she said. "On his arms. And one on his neck." "And did he attempt to cover those scratches?" Melissa's eyes flicked toward Daniel for the first time. He stared back with cold intensity. Melissa looked away. "Yes," she said. "He used my concealer." A murmur moved through the courtroom like wine through dead leaves. The defense jumped up, objecting. The judge overruled. Melissa continued, voice tightening. "He said it was nothing. But he was shaking. He looked frightened." "Did he say anything about Laura Bennett?" the prosecutor asked. Melissa hesitated. Her jaw worked, as if she were forcing herself through a wall. Then she said, "He said, she did this to me." It wasn't confession. But it was a crack in the foundation of every defense argument. It showed Daniel's mind wasn't in the place of an innocent colleague worried about a missing woman. He was speaking like someone injured by a person who had already been silenced. After Melissa left the stand, Daniel's defense shifted strategy. They became more aggressive, more accusatory. They tried to paint Detective Cole as biased and determined to make evidence fit. But Cole didn't fit the stereotype of an emotional investigator chasing a story. She stayed calm, accurate, and careful with language. She also had one more piece that made Daniel's innocent act almost impossible to believe. The break-in. The prosecutor showed the jury the police report Daniel filed days after Laura disappeared, including the list of missing items, laptop and phone. Then he played a clip from Daniel's first interview, where Daniel had claimed he didn't remember the last time he contacted Laura, and that he had given her space. The prosecutor let the contradiction sit in the air. Then he said, quietly, "So the defendant tells police he isn't contacting her. Yet his phone contains thousands of messages to her. And then, after her disappearance, those devices are suddenly stolen, only those devices. Not valuables. Not anything else." The defense tried to argue coincidence. The jury didn't look convinced. In the final week of trial, the prosecution delivered their strongest structural point. Laura disappeared in a tiny gap near her office. Daniel's phone and presence overlap with the exact time window. He then changes his behavior: scratches, concealment, suspicious arrival, frantic cleaning, staged burglary, abrupt remote travel. Dogs alert to his vehicle and linked areas. This wasn't bad luck. This was a chain of decisions. And when the case went to closing arguments, the prosecutor spoke directly to the jury's fear of uncertainty. You are not being asked to imagine what happened. You are being asked to recognize what the evidence shows. He pointed to Laura's photo. Laura Bennett did not abandon her life. She did not abandon her parents. She did not abandon her dog. She did not vanish into thin air. She was intercepted. She was taken. And the defendant's behavior afterward is the behavior of someone trying to erase what he did. Then, for the first time, he said the words bluntly. This was murder. Daniel's defense argued that the case was built on assumption. But when the jury left to deliberate, the courtroom felt like it was holding its breath inside a sealed room. Laura's parents sat perfectly still. Laura's mother held the scarf fragment recovered in the remote wooded area, a small piece of fabric in a plastic sleeve that looked too fragile to carry so much meaning. Hours passed. Then, late in the afternoon, the jury returned. Everyone stood. Daniel didn't. He remained seated, face hard, as if refusing to participate in reality itself. The clerk read the verdict. On the charge of murder. A pause that felt endless. We find the defendant guilty. Laura's mother made no sound, no cry, no gasp. She simply bowed her head and pressed her hand to her mouth as if holding herself together by force. Then the clerk continued. On the charge of attempting to obstruct justice. Guilty. The courtroom blurred for Laura's father. His vision filled with tears he hadn't felt coming. Daniel finally stood. For the first time in the entire process, his mask slipped. His face twisted, not into grief, not into regret. Into anger. He looked directly at Laura's family, eyes sharp with blame, as if they had done this to him. His lawyer touched his arm, urging calm. But Daniel leaned forward and hissed, barely audible, "You'll never find her." It wasn't loud enough for the court record. But Detective Cole saw Laura's mother flinch. And she knew. She knew those words weren't a slip. They were the closest thing to truth Daniel Price would ever give voluntarily. Weeks later, Daniel was sentenced to life imprisonment. The judge spoke about obsession and entitlement, about the deliberate effort to conceal evidence. He spoke about Laura as a real person, not a headline. Daniel listened with cold eyes. No apology. No remorse. When the courtroom emptied, Laura's family remained seated long after everyone else had gone. People assumed they were processing closure. But there was no closure. Not without Laura. Not without a grave. Not without the final act of bringing her home. Outside the courthouse, microphones waited, but Laura's mother ignored them. She spoke only to Detective Cole, voice hoarse. "Thank you," she said. Cole nodded, but she didn't pretend the story was over. Because as the sun lowered behind the buildings, and Daniel Price was driven away to begin his sentence, one fact remained unchanged. Laura Bennett was still out there somewhere. And justice on paper was not the same as peace. The conviction brought a kind of quiet to the city. Not comfort, just quiet. The headlines moved on. New cases replaced old ones. The courthouse emptied and filled again. Daniel Price disappeared behind prison walls, becoming a number in a system that did not care about his excuses, his charm, or his anger. But Laura Bennett did not return. And for her parents, time did not heal, time only widened the gap between what the world accepted and what they still needed. At first, they believed it would change quickly. That after the verdict, Daniel would talk. That prison pressure would break him. That someone would come forward with a tip, a memory, a detail they had been afraid to share before. The weeks after sentencing were filled with calls. Detective Hannah Cole continued working the case because she couldn't let it settle into the filing cabinet of "solved." She ran new searches on Daniel's movements from that winter, rechecked the routes, the fuel receipts, the camera captures. She followed up on rumors that came through the hotline: a man with a shovel, a parked car at night, an odd smell near a trail. Most were nothing. Some were cruel pranks. One caller claimed to know where Laura was and demanded money. Another claimed Laura had "run away," as if the absence of remains made every lie possible. Laura's mother, Diane Bennett, stopped answering unknown numbers. She stopped going to the store alone. Grief had not weakened her love, it had sharpened it into vigilance. Every morning, she still set Milo's bowl down at the same time. She still walked him along Laura's favorite route, as if the routine itself might summon her daughter back. At Laura's apartment, Diane kept everything in place. Not as a shrine, she refused to call it that, but as proof. Proof that Laura had been here. Proof that she had not chosen to disappear. Laura's hairbrush remained on the dresser. Her mug remained in the cabinet. Her coat still hung by the door, untouched, smelling faintly of detergent and Laura's perfume. Friends suggested packing things away, for healing. Diane stared at them like they had spoken in a foreign language. "What do you pack away," she asked, "when your child isn't home?" On the first anniversary of Laura's disappearance, the family held a vigil near Greystone House. The city approved a small memorial plaque near East Alder Street, close to the blind zone where Laura vanished. People left flowers, cards, handmade drawings. Her co-workers attended, many with tears they hadn't allowed themselves to show in court. Detective Cole stood slightly apart, watching the street. It looked ordinary in daylight. Busy. Harmless. That was the part that never stopped haunting her, the fact that it happened in plain sight, meters from safety, and no one realized it until it was too late. Laura's father, Richard, spoke briefly into a microphone. "My daughter was a good person," he said. "She lived quietly. She didn't make enemies. She didn't take risks. She deserved to get to work that morning. She deserved to come home." Diane stepped forward next. She held Laura's photo in both hands. "People keep telling us," she said, voice trembling but steady, "that justice has been done. But justice in court is not the same as closure." A hush settled over the crowd. "My daughter is not a case file," Diane said. "She is a person. She is not missing evidence. She is Laura. And I will not stop asking where she is until she is brought home." That night, Detective Cole returned to her office and opened the file again. She didn't do it because policy demanded it. She did it because Daniel Price still had power as long as he held the one thing Laura's family wanted most. And Cole refused to let him keep it comfortably. Over the next year, they tried everything. They offered Daniel an opportunity to speak, privately, without cameras, with no promises beyond listening. They tried structured interviews through prison channels. They tried indirect pressure, reminding him of the dignity he could give Laura's family, the humanity he could reclaim. Daniel offered nothing. He filed appeals. He complained of unfair media portrayal. He argued technicalities. He spoke about himself endlessly. But about Laura's location, about the truth that mattered, he remained silent. One appeal reached a higher court. The defense argued the evidence was circumstantial, that without remains the conviction should not stand. The review took months. Diane lived through those months as if carrying glass in her chest. She knew what Daniel was trying to do, not to prove innocence, but to reopen the wound, to remind the world that Laura's absence could still be exploited. When the appeal was denied, Diane didn't celebrate. She simply sat at the kitchen table and whispered, "Good." Not because she felt victory. Because she felt protection. Daniel would remain where he belonged. Still, the case was not complete. Years passed. Milo grew older, slower. His muzzle grayed. His hearing softened. Yet every time Diane picked up her keys, Milo still looked toward the door as if expecting Laura to appear beside them, leash in hand. One winter, Diane found herself in Laura's apartment again, dusting the bookshelf, wiping the window that overlooked the street. Outside, people walked to work with coffee cups, scarves, phones in hand. Every single one of them unaware. Diane leaned her forehead against the cold glass and realized something that brought a fresh wave of grief. The world could keep moving without Laura. But she could not. Detective Cole visited occasionally, not often, because she respected boundaries, but enough to prove the case hadn't been forgotten. Each time she came, Diane asked the same question. Any updates? Cole's answer was usually honest and painful. No. Not yet. But on one spring morning, 7 years after Laura vanished, Cole arrived looking different. Tired, yes, but also intent. We may have something, she said. Diane went still, like a person hearing her own name in a dream. Cole explained carefully, a renewed search was being planned, based on reanalysis of Daniel's old travel pattern and advanced mapping techniques. Some areas had never been properly searched due to private land boundaries and poor conditions at the time. Permissions were now granted. Resources were available. Diane didn't ask if it would work. She didn't ask if it was likely. She asked only one thing. When? 2 weeks later, search teams returned to the remote region Daniel had visited after Laura disappeared: woodland, shallow ditches, rough access paths. This time, the search was larger and more precise. Dogs. Ground scanning tools. Teams moving line by line. The work was slow. Hours became days. Then, on the third morning, a searcher raised a hand. A small item had been found. Not remains. But a personal object buried beneath layers of soil near the edge of the ditch, sealed inside rotted plastic. A keychain. Laura's keychain. It was simple, a metal loop, a worn leather tag, and a small charm shaped like a paw print. Diane recognized it instantly. She sat down on the ground, hands shaking, as if her body finally gave up the fight to remain upright. Detective Cole crouched beside her. It's hers, Diane whispered. Cole nodded. Yes. The discovery didn't end the case. But it changed something vital. Because it proved, beyond doubt and beyond debate, that Laura had been there. That Daniel's trip had not been harmless. That the remote area wasn't coincidence. And now, with the keychain found, the search expanded. Days turned into weeks. Some areas yielded nothing. Others offered fragments of possibility: disturbed soil, degraded fabric fibers, more personal traces. Still no full answer. Still no final moment of bringing her home. But Diane, who had lived for years inside an unbearable unanswered question, felt something shift. Not peace. But momentum. She looked at Detective Cole and said, "You're still here." Cole answered plainly, "So are you." The Bennetts continued. They aged with the fight. They learned to live inside missing parts. They learned that grief did not end, it only changed shape. Laura's mother eventually began speaking publicly again, not with dramatic anger but with steady purpose. She worked with advocacy groups, pushed for better camera coverage around office districts, for faster missing person response systems, for resources in cases that risked being forgotten. And every time she spoke, she ended with the same line. Conviction is not closure. Years later, Daniel Price remained in prison. He never admitted guilt. He never gave a location. He never allowed Laura's family the dignity of knowing where she rested. But his silence didn't erase what the world had accepted in court. He would not walk free. He would not rewrite the story as doubt. And Laura Bennett, though still not fully recovered, was not erased. Her name remained spoken. Her photo remained held. Her routine remained remembered down to the minute. Because in the Bennett family's home, Laura was not a tragedy from the past. She was still a daughter. Still loved. Still waiting to be brought home. And until that day came, the case was not finished, no matter what the paperwork said.